Okay, what this shows us is that on this Woodhenge number 3, which is the third of the 5 circles that they've reproduced here, the observer's post, in other words, the point from which the observer, the person using the solar calendar was right here, is a little bit slightly east of the center point, which is where this X is here. In order to form an angle of 30.8 degrees needed to sight solstices at this altitude. So they were that well aware of what their precise latitude was. So I'm guessing that this is the exact center of the circle and that's the sighting post. I'm just guessing. It may be made of cedar, which they had a high respect for as a wood, a religious respect for, I believe. So probably those poles that have the white on them are for the solstice and the equinoxes. Probably the summer and winter solstice. I'm not going to try and divine it. I can't. There's the other one there. But you can imagine how important this was as a technology, and how important it was as a ritualistic experience for the people, including the people who lived up on Monk's Mound, who used this to create a greater bond and adherence and compliance to the power of the chieftain, because he could relate his power to the sun, maybe even the stars, perhaps the moon that we see up there. It's interesting as we contemplate or reflect on the technology of these, what we would think of as primitive people, particularly even at that time, compared to the Europeans who would arrive a few hundred years later in this country. But by then in Europe already had this technology and more. And to reflect on why the difference. Of course, the European culture's knowledge base includes not only Europe, but probably more importantly and more impactful, Asia and the Muslim world, and perhaps even the Chinese and Oriental world. I'm here on a Tuesday. It's closed Monday and Tuesday, probably because of the current state of near bankruptcy, if not in fact bankruptcy, of the state of Illinois, or at least Chicago. Now to my left is what's called Monk's Mound, and that'll help us orientate where I'm standing and what we'll be seeing today and tomorrow. Cahokia in its day pretty much covered this area here, I think 5 or 6 square miles. Off ahead of us to our right is Canteen Creek and Cahokia Creek off here to the left. Apparently this is where the original site was. All this began around 700 to 800 in what's called the late woodland era. Now to give you an idea how large this is Monk's Mound here. And here's the freeway over here, 55. And I'm going to lift the camera so you can see that trailer truck with the red cab going by. That's where 55 is. Behind me, way down here somewhere, is 255. If I'm standing just about at that point, that'll give you a hint of what we're talking about here as to how huge this area was. We're just, if you go back to this map, just at maybe the upper 20 to 25% of the height, or the north to south distance of this huge mound culture. From that AD 700 to 800 period, it expanded into what's called the early Mississippian times of 800 to 1,000. And then the population increased again, reaching a peak at about AD 1050 to 1150, with an estimated population of 10 to 20,000 people. Now the irony is a change began, and the population decline began in about the 1200s, and by AD 1315 to 1400 AD, it had been collapsed and abandoned, all of it. And the reasons for abandonment are thought to be what probably is the case with most of the great cultures that existed in those early days and earlier throughout the world. A combination of depletion of the resources in the region, the internal and social political unrest, external friction and conflict with other groups, think of Rome and what Caesar characterized as the barbarians, climatic changes, I think we're finding out had the most dramatic effect on all societies throughout the history of man. Of course, something that plagued many cultures that we know for sure was just exhaustion of the soil. They overused it. This drawing gives us a little hint of what it might have looked like to be here and live here. And keep in mind, the same video perspective I would have taken of Greece's Acropolis. How secure and important and powerful did these political leaders and their populace feel living in the shadow of these great mounds that have been built over the hundreds of years? Didn't Rome feel the same? Greece feel the same? Egypt feel the same? Mayans, the Incas, the Aztecs feel the same? All to collapse. And America seems to feel the same. Now this picture, or painting, seems to show that the area surrounding this monk's mound off to our left had a wall around it for an inner enclosure, all of which had some homes, or at least some structure, presumably residence as well as other functions, but then all around it to the sides, additional structures. This painting seems to show a rather primitive, or at least a summertime context for these people, living in a very flimsy little shelter, providing simply a little bit of shelter from the sun. Of course, in the background, across the stream here, we see some structures, and maybe those were dwellings. There's a diagram of how Monk's tomb, or Monk's mound would have been used. A is the south ramp, B the first terrace with mound and building, C second terrace, D third terrace, fourth E terrace with a large structure and marker post. That's probably this big yellow thing we see right there. So let's walk up on top of this mound and get a sense of what the powerful people and their minions had as a perspective.